We are living in a world that is just drowning in data. So the big question is, how do we find the important stuff? Well, today, we're going to dive into some of the most powerful machine learning tools that help us separate the signal from all that noise, and really, how we tame the data beast.
We hear it all the time. More data is always better. But in the world of machine learning, that can be a really dangerous assumption. Let's dig into why that is.
The reality is, a lot of the time, just adding more features, or what we call dimensions, to your data can actually do more harm than good. It creates a problem with a very cool, very fitting name, the curse of dimensionality. So here's the deal. As you pile on more and more features, the complexity just skyrockets. It gets way harder for an algorithm to find a good solution, and it can lead to something called overfitting. That's where the model basically just memorizes the data it's seen, instead of actually learning the real patterns inside of it.
So, if that's the curse, how do we fight it? Well, our first set of tools is all about one thing, making data simpler but without losing the stuff that really matters.
Okay, this image really gets to the core idea of what we call dimensionality reduction. We're taking this complex, three-dimensional data, you see the cylinders here, and we're projecting it down onto a simpler two-dimensional space. By kind of flattening the data out, the patterns that were hidden before can suddenly become way easier to see.
Now, a classic tried-and-true technique for this is Principal Component Analysis, or PCA for short. It's specifically designed to find the most important patterns by figuring out the directions where the data varies the most.
So PCA works by basically rotating the data to find a whole new set of axes. The very first axis, which is labeled E1 here, that's called the first principal component. It's simply the direction that captures the most possible variation in the data. We can then decide to keep just the most important components and just toss the rest. It simplifies everything.
But here's the catch. PCA is fantastic for linear relationships, but real-world data is, well, it's rarely that neat and tidy. A lot of the time, it follows these complex, curved patterns that a straight line just can't possibly capture.
So for tangled-up data, like this Swiss roll you see here, we need a totally different approach. This is where something called locally linear embedding, or LLE, comes into play. See, unlike PCA, LLE focuses on the relationships between a data point and its immediate neighbors. This lets it computationally unroll these complex curved shapes into a simple, flat space, where you can finally see the true structure.
All right, let's switch gears. We're going to look at a different kind of problem now. It's not about simplifying data, but about separating a messy, mixed-up signal into its original hidden sources.
This is what's known as the cocktail party problem, and it's just a perfect analogy for the next technique we're going to talk about. It's something our brains do automatically, but how in the world can a computer pull it off?
Imagine you've got microphones all over the room. Each one is picking up a slightly different mix of everybody's voices. This creates a whole set of jumbled, overlapping signals. So the real challenge is, how do you untangle that mess and pull out each person's individual voice?
The solution is a technique called independent component analysis, or ICA, and it works by making one really important assumption: that the original sources, so the individual voices in our example, are all statistically independent of each other.
And right here, you can see the power of ICA in action. It's pretty amazing. At the top, you have the original, clean signals. In the middle, you've got the messy, observed signals that were actually recorded. And then ICA computationally unmixes them to recover the estimated sources at the bottom, which are, wow, remarkably close to the originals. Okay, on to our final section. Let's shift from simplifying and separating data to another huge challenge in machine learning. How do you find the absolute best solution to a problem when there are just a vast number of possibilities?
A foundational method for this is the least squares method. If you've ever done any kind of regression modeling, you've definitely seen this before. The goal is pretty simple. Draw a line through a scatter plot of data that gets as close as it possibly can to all the points at the same time.
For any line you might draw, you can measure the vertical distance, that's the error, from the line to each individual data point. The least squares method is all about finding that one unique line where the sum of the squares of all those little errors is as small as it can possibly be.
But what happens when the problem is way too complex for just a simple line? What if the world of possible solutions is enormous and rugged and messy? For those kinds of tough optimization problems, we need a much more creative approach, one that's actually inspired by nature itself.
And this is where genetic algorithms come in. These are absolutely fascinating search algorithms that literally mimic the process of evolution. Instead of just one solution, they create a whole population of potential solutions, and then have them compete, mate, and mutate over many generations to produce better and better answers. It's survival of the fittest for data.
The whole process really does mirror Darwinian evolution. First, through selection, the best solutions get chosen to be parents. Then you have crossover, which combines their genetic information to create new offspring. And finally, mutation introduces small, random changes to keep the gene pool diverse and explore brand new possibilities.
And here's what those two core ideas look like. On the left, crossover takes pieces from two parent solutions to create a new child. And over on the right, mutation randomly flips one of the genes in a single solution. It's this combination of exploiting what works and still exploring new ideas that makes genetic algorithms so incredibly powerful.
So we've really flown through some powerful tools here for dimensionality reduction, signal separation, and optimization. But what's the real-world impact? Why do we even need to tame this data beast in the first place?
Well, the impact is huge. These techniques let us compress data to save storage space. They cut down on computation time so our models run faster, they help us strip out redundant features for cleaner results, and they let us visualize incredibly complex information. And, to bring it all full circle, they are our absolute best defense against that curse of dimensionality and model overfitting.
You know, ultimately, these aren't just abstract algorithms. Think of them as the keys we use to unlock the secrets hidden deep inside the world's most complex data. By simplifying, separating, and optimizing, we're paving the way for the next great discovery. The only real question is, what are we going to find next?